So the third thing I want you to know is you can um, create a branch from a specific commit. So a commit is just an entry in the big ledger of revisions that track individual files and update them at each point in the ledger when you do a commit. And one thing you can do if you need to go back to a point in history and start doing some stuff is you can do this line here, which is just git commit dash lowercase b creates the new branch, and you can provide the first 7 digits of a commit. So for example, over here, when I typed in git log, I have this log, and here's this unique ID of each revision in time that also tracks what revision came before it. I can just copy and paste the first 7 digits. The first 7 digits are more or less unique. And I can copy the whole thing too. And I can do git checkout dash b my new branch with this unique ID to go back to that point in history. Or I can include the first the first 7 characters to reset the state of my current directory to just be whatever its state was at that point in the ledger. The other cool thing here is I might also want to use these symbolic references, which we won't really talk about here. But what this will do is it'll take whatever the current state of my working directory is and say, I want to go 3 commits behind that. And that's a tilde in the middle there. Now, when you go back, say I have multiple branches that cover multiple features, you can imagine that I'll have entries in the ledger that all occur sequentially. Like if I have branch 1, branch 2, branch 3, and these all have separate revision histories, well, I might take this branch 3 that has the most recent and try to merge it into that first branch. It'll still work, but it'll do something called a fast forward, and that belies some of the underlying complexity of what's going on, because how can you fast forward in points in a ledger and effectively skip over points in that ledger and still maintain integrity? So that's kind of fun. The other thing I want to talk about is you can create what are called tags. So if I go back to git log, you'll notice that I created a tag, a named tag that actually goes to this commit. So I could conceivably, if I created a tag for a commit that is related to the first stable release or something, and I always want to go back to that first stable release, I can do something like git checkout the tag name, right? So that's super handy to know about. Using tags and going back to points in history with those tags also creates some issues. It creates something called a detached head state, which is where you've checked out a commit that isn't necessarily a branch. So Git says, I can't keep track of all these things. What are you talking about? There's no thing for me to keep track of here. And of course, the way around that is you do git checkout dash b, creating a new branch that starts at that point in history, and then Git says, oh, you just want me to create a branch and keep track of that in a separate branch, and only keep it and start it just back at that point in history. I'm fine with that. So finally, there's a thing called a git patch, which is not uh, what you think is happening. Where, oh, I created this patch for a file inside of a new branch and I send it in. A git patch is actually a whole suite of tools that kind of come back from the 90s when we didn't have a lot of the other tools that exist, like GitHub. And what you do is maybe I've checked out a Git repo, um, but I only have public access to the main branch that's related to a specific stable production state. Uh, I get some bug in my code, and I say, oh, well, this is weird. I'm going to just work on it myself and send that back up. So you can actually uh, take the source code that you have and write edits on top of it. It'll have its own unique ID, which is totally fine. And then you can send what revisions you made into an actual text file, and you might want to email that text file containing that difference history to someone, and then they can reconstruct it on their side, and maybe they have actual write access to this repo, and they can sign off on the changes that you suggest and actually put it in. So you can have, and finally, you have multiple branches with multiple points where the head of that branch is actually pointing inside of the ledger. If I have a ledger here, I might have a branch master that's here, but maybe my patch new feature is actually located back over here. These are two different heads for two different branches that point at the same point in history, and you also have multiple tags. More or less, you can just kind of change. You do like git tag -af to force a different, if a tag already exists, to force a different commit to be named that tag. Of course, you can share all of this. So if you've set up so that your remote is GitHub, you can do git push --tags, and it'll send those tags out to the remote repo, and then anybody else that's talking with you about it can git fetch and git pull and get those tags so that they can go back to the exact same point in history. Of course, it doesn't make it's useful to keep track of things with named constants, but you can just send them the unique ID, and that's always recommended. Also, on top of that, in order to go back to a point in history, which we've been talking about so far, there's actually a utility called git revert, which creates a new commit saying, okay, however many commits I'm reverting, and you'll put the commit hash here. And here is my ledger, and I'm here. When I type in git revert for a commit that's here, it'll reset everything to one behind it, and it'll say, okay, the new state of this whole branch is actually way back down here, at the previous point in history, and you can make changes on top of that. But you just create a commit that is saying this range of other commits behind me is invalid, essentially. So that's something that I want you to know about.